In this video, I'll go over data classification policy. Data integrity relates to how trustworthy and authentic data is considered. This can be assured in various ways. At the technical control level, file hashing is used to take the unique bit level data and apply it against an algorithm that results in a unique value. That unique value is called a hash. Now, when we run that algorithm against that same data in the future, if there's a change, the hash value will be different. So we'll know that something has changed. Administrative controls, including things like separation of duties, can also assure data integrity or business process integrity. Separation of duties ensures that no single person has control of an entire business process from beginning to end, especially as it relates to IT and security. Mandatory vacations not only ensure that people are refreshed, but also while they're on vacation, people filling their roles will be able to notice any anomalies if there are any. Not only anomalies, but also inefficiencies in how things are done. Change management processes are a structured and organized way to apply changes in an organization. Now, as it relates to IT, it's important that this be outlined and known to related personnel so that changes are applied in a controlled manner and we have a way to roll back out of changes if there's a problem. Dual control requires that at least two people be present in order to complete a process. So, for example, if our data backups are encrypted, we might require two technicians to be present, each having a part of a decryption key. And when those two parts are put together, we have the single key that's required to decrypt that backup. Cross training can also be very important. In the IT world, technicians are used to reducing single points of failure, whether that's in a power supply, at the disk level, server level, and so on. At the personnel level, with cross training, we've got more than one person that are able to perform a duty. So that if one person is unable to perform a duty, or if they leave the organization or they're busy on another project, we've got somebody else that can perform that task. Succession planning is also crucial so that we have got someone in mind that we train over time that can fill the shoes of somebody that will be moving on to other departments, other projects, or even perhaps moving into retirement. A data classification policy identifies different types of data. Now, why would we want to do that? Why can't all data be treated the same? Well, some data is more sensitive than other data. And so, with the data classification policy, we might look into database records or files to determine if there is something sensitive like financial transactions, health records, whether records or files contain personally identifiable information or PI, things like email addresses or social security numbers, that's all considered PI. And in some cases, we might be required, due to regulations or laws, to encrypt data that is considered sensitive. Also, this data classification can be related to data retention requirements. So perhaps data that is not considered PI, person identifiable information, doesn't need to be retained, whereas financial transactions, due to the industry we're in, might need to be retained for a number of years. So this is an ongoing task. The reason this is true is because as we get new records or new files placed on a file server, they need to be classified. So we need some way to determine, does that new data contain financial information, health information, and so on? And as such, it should be classified accordingly. So if it's got financial information in it, it should be classified in some way that we can identify that. And that would go along with our data retention of financial information for numerous years. We can automate data classification. It's not as if somebody has to be watching for any new or changed database records or files to flag them manually. So we can automate the classification through metadata tagging. Metadata is extra information that gets stored with existing data. As an example, Microsoft's File Server Resource Manager is a role service in the Windows Server operating system that does just this. Let's go take a look at it right now. On my file server, I've gone to drive C into the contracts folder where I've got a file called contract A. Now, if I right click on a file here in the Windows Server OS and go to the properties option, If there is a classification tab visible, because there may not be, it means that the File Server Resource Manager option is installed. So clearly it's installed here. So I'm going to cancel out of that. On my server, I'm going to go to my Start button and look for File Server. And what I want to do here is run the File Server Resource Manager tool. Now this does numerous things, but we're only interested here in classification management. So I'm going to click under Classification Management on the left on Classification Properties. Now over on the right, I see any existing local properties that are tied to this specific server that can be used to flag files, and any global ones come from Active Directory. For example, here there's a department global property that we can use to flag files and tie them to a department. Now we can also build our own properties. If I were to right-click on classification properties on the left, I could choose to create a local property. I'm going to make one here called Financial Data. Down below for the property type, I'm going to choose yes, no. So either it is or is not financial data, but notice I've got other data types here like number, multiple choice list, string, and so on. Then I'm going to click OK. And notice that the financial data local property now shows up in the list. Let's go back to our file. So I'm going to switch back to the Windows Explorer tool. I'm going to right-click on the Contract A file again and go back into Properties. And under Classification, notice that we've got both department and financial data available here. So department, for instance, is selected. And down below, I can choose which department that this file might be tied to. Now, of course, I'm doing this manually. We'll talk about the automation in a moment. So maybe this is related to the finance department. So up above, we see department equals now finance. For financial data, I can either choose yes or no value. So again, I'm doing this manually, but if I deem that there is financial data stored in this document, I would choose yes. So we can now see the file is flagged for the finance department, and yes, it does have financial data. So I'm going to click OK. But what about automating that? Well, let's go back to the File Server Resource Manager. On the left, I'm going to right-click on Classification Rules to create one. I'm going to call this Rule 1, and under the Scope tab, down below, I'm going to click Add. I have to tell it where I want to scour or scan the file server looking for files that might be considered financial data files. So I'm going to tell it to scan drive C. Under the Classification tab, I'm going to make sure it's set to Content Classifier, and down below, I'm going to click the Configure button. What I'm going to look for here is a string value within files. Let's say that if it's got USD for US dollars, I consider that to be a financial file. So we can get much more detailed than that with our expression, but that's what we're going to go with in this example. So I'm going to click OK. Now, when we do find files on drive C that contain USD, I want to flag it as financial data equals yes. So I'll choose that from here, and then I'll click OK. Now, at any point in time, over on the right in the action panel, you see you can run classification with all rules. That's still manual. What I could do is configure a classification schedule. So I could enable a schedule, determine which days of the week I want this to run on and at what time, and it will run my classification rules for me. Data classification can also go hand in hand with authentication. So depending how people authenticate will determine what type of data they'll be able to get to. For example, sensitive data might require multi-factor authentication that otherwise would be unavailable to users. Role-based access to data is very common, where we limit data access to job roles on a need-to-know basis. This is most often implemented through the use of groups that might have permissions to files flagged as being financial data. In this video, we talked about data classification policies.